sit to stand. The way that I do movement analysis is to talk about the joint and then the muscle. Okay? So, Dawn is currently in a sitting position and she's slouched back. She is in a position of, depending what you call 0 or 180 degrees. So if you call this the anatomical position, that's 0, or you could call it 180 degrees. That's where the confusion comes from. Let's assume that that is 0, therefore that is 90, therefore that is halfway between 0 and 90. So that's 45 degrees. That's the way I would do it for today. Okay. So Dawn is in a position of 45 degrees hip flexion. Looking at the movements, Dawn, if you sit forward for me, Dawn then goes into 90 degrees of hip flexion. She then goes into 120 degrees of hip flexion. Stand up, please. She goes even further into 125 and then goes back into 0, which is the anatomical position. That's half of the job done. Okay, now have a seat, please, Dawn. In terms of muscles, the way that I do it is this red piece of rope represents Dawn's hip flexors. Okay, to get Dawn to sit up, the hip flexors have to pull concentrically. While the hip flexors are pulling concentrically, her hip extensors are reciprocally lengthening to allow the movement to happen. Once Dawn gets to this point, if I keep pulling, Dawn's going to break her nose. The way that I imagine this is that I'm a clown trying to erect a circus pole. So once Dawn gets to this point, these muscles have to control the movement going down. So the hip extensors have to control a forward movement. So that's eccentric work of the hip extensors. While the hip extensors are eccentrically controlling the movement, Dawn's hip flexors are reciprocally shortening, ready to act when they need to. Once Dawn gets to this position, now I can pull and stand her up. So that's a concentric contraction of the hip extensors with reciprocal lengthening of the hip flexors. Once Dawn's finished, she's stood in a neutral position. She's stood in the anatomical position, which is 0. There will be some co-contraction of different muscles working. I thank you. Available for children's parties?